Well, whatever shape banking reform ultimately takes, you can be sure that insider trading will still be illegal. And a major case of insider trading is under investigation right now in the U.K. A seventh person is under arrest as the United Kingdom's Financial Services Authority wined a net that has already caught workers at Deutsche Bank and hedge fund Moore Capital Management LLC. Computers and documents were seized at 16 rated locations, and the investigation isn't over yet. Joining us now is Fred Tecce. He's a former federal prosecutor who has argued and defended SEC in conspiracy cases like this. He's now a partner with McShea Tecce. Always good to talk to you. Welcome back to Bloomberg News.
Mark, thank you very much for having me. Glad to be here.
Thank you. What's the difference between the FSA and our SEC?
Well, there's actually, Mark, there's a lot of differences. The FSA is actually a non-governmental agency. It was formed in 1997, and it takes what they call a principled approach and has come under criticism, quite frankly, over the years for not doing enough to stop insider trading. The SEC, as you know, is a governmental agency. It works on what they call a rules-based approach, and the SEC, actively goes after and prosecutes people. Other criticisms of the FSA, it's kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. The FSA has been criticized for not doing enough to go after and look into insider trading in Great Britain. But now that I've read that there are conservatives in Parliament who, at the end of this election, are talking about trying to disband it. So we'll see what happens.
Talk to us about the scope of this case. What can you tell us? How much more light can you shed?
Well, you know what? It's difficult for me to shed more light because a lot of the information's been withheld. But if it's, I have no reason to believe it's atypical or not unlike a lot of the other insider trading cases. What ends up happening is that law enforcement, and I've worked with the serious fraud unit in Great Britain, law enforcement will get in, will talk to people, will let them know that they're under investigation or indictment and charged, and then try to get them to provide additional information. They've seized computers, and you can expect to have forensic work done on the computer. Mark, you've heard me say this before. Just because people delete things from their computer does not mean that you can't go get it back. In fact, most of the information that you think is deleted can usually be obtained with a forensic computer consultant. So I think what you're going to see is, based upon evidence gathered, efforts to try and, what we used to say, flip people who are insiders to get additional defendants, and the investigation will continue, and it will go as far as the evidence will lead law enforcement.
Hey, Fred, you talked about the differences between the FSA and the SEC. What about law here and there? Is it more difficult at all to make an insider trading case, or are there significant differences in the laws?
Well, you know what, Julie? It's based on what I've seen. I mean, they have a different approach. Although it's interesting. I've read that the head of the FSA says that their principle-based approach is really rules, and I've heard the head of the SEC say that our rules-based approach is really principles, which manifest itself in the 33 and 34 Act. I was a federal prosecutor in Philadelphia. I don't think I'd look really good in a wig, so I've never prosecuted anybody in Great Britain. But the fact of the matter is that proving up these cases is not just common sense, but it's just kind of good old-fashioned law enforcement. You gather evidence, you approach people with that evidence, you get them to provide additional evidence, and you just continue the investigation. So the answer to your question is, I think there's not a significant difference in the law that would manifest itself in how the case gets investigated and prosecuted.
Talk to us then about, I guess, the international web here, because at some point when you're talking about a case of this scope, can you make any similarities to any cases that you've been involved in?
Oh, I most certainly can. And in fact, when I was a prosecutor, we worked with British law enforcement. I've worked very closely with Canadian law enforcement when I was a federal prosecutor. And in fact, remember, I was actually attending criminal prosecutions in Ottawa, Canada. And on these types of cases, particularly now, we've got a global economy. These companies and these insiders and this trading takes place all across markets across the world. So there is a conscious effort by law enforcement over the years, both the U.S. law enforcement, with Canadian law enforcement and British law enforcement, to work together. And I saw that firsthand when I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office. So I think that's going to continue, and I think you'll see, if the investigation leads here, they'll come here.
Yeah.
But does that get tricky at all, prosecuting that, cooperation between the agencies?
You know, it's funny, Julie. I used to say when I was a federal prosecutor, because there's always kind of this interagency competitiveness. I mean, I used to always say, I don't get it. The Statute of Liberty was on all of our checks, and so. But at the end of the day, people kind of put that aside. They put kind of national pride aside, and these are dedicated men and women who are committed to upholding the laws in their respective countries, and they will work closely with with anybody or with whatever organizations present themselves or present evidence to bring a case. All
right, we'll keep watching and see if there are any more arrests in this case. Fred Tecce, Fred, for the record, I think he'd look great in a wig with the robe arguing in the
I'd look great in a robe. It would hide a lot of my sins.
Fred Tecce and McShea Tecce, thanks as always for joining us to give some legal perspective. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.